right, well, it's a pleasure to be here this morning. And I wanted to thank Leanne and the Veiling crew for making this event possible, this Floodwater Mosquito Control Summit. And I'll also note that floodwater mosquitoes are by far the most troublesome pest species that we deal with on an annual basis here in New Jersey. So my objectives are to review the species using a concept of life cycle types for our New Jersey mosquitoes. I'll then touch on the organization of mosquito control in New Jersey, and then move on to a couple of the state programs and some contracts that we use to help aid the mosquito control efforts here in New Jersey. The goal there is to set up for the talks, and New Jersey talks they're gonna follow. So we proposed this concept of species life cycle really as a teaching tool for mosquito biology. And what we realized is if we group the different mosquitoes that we have in the state on these 4 criteria, where the eggs are laid, the typical larval habitat where the mosquitoes develop, the number of generations per year that the mosquito goes through, and then the life stage that overwinters, you get a fairly concise and condensed grouping of the mosquitoes here in the state. And a number of the species share these characteristics, which once you learn one of them, the life cycle type for that species, for example, it makes it a lot easier to kind of group all the other ones that share those characteristics. So in New Jersey, when you do that for our 64 different species that we have here, you wind up with 11 groupings of shared characters, and then 3 monotypic groups. In other words, a single species that fits into that life cycle group. So when we do this for New Jersey, this is pretty much what you come up with. What I'm showing you here is univoltine aiding life cycle types, multivoltine, and then as you read across, there are 5 different, categories. And within that, you have your Aedes stimulans life cycle type and the various species here in New Jersey that all share those characteristics, Aedes obturatus and those species, Aedes canadensis, and those 3 species. Now, when you further divide this with respect to this talk, that's coming up, they all share the same or similar oviposition habitat, larval habitat, generations per year, and of course the stage that the mosquito uses to pass the winter months. So looking at this for the floodwater species more in general, what you'll notice is they're kind of restricted to that univoltine aiding life cycle type and the multivoltine aiding life cycle type. And you'll hear a little bit more about how to control these mosquitoes in the talks that follow me. When you get to our fresh floodwater mosquitoes, really there's 3 life cycle types that we deal with here in New Jersey that I'll be addressing from the state perspective. Knowing that ignores our saltwater floodwater mosquitoes, which is not a very good idea. I wouldn't recommend doing that. But we have our Aedes stimulans life cycle type, Aedes vexans, probably the most common with respect to the problems and the number of species that fall within that grouping. And then of course our Aedes canadensis life cycle type. So, and our previous speaker touched on that very nicely. Floodwater mosquitoes all have these eggs that can dry down. We call them desiccation resistant eggs. In some cases, they need to dry down, where they'll wait in a period of suspended animation. And this could be days, weeks, or even years in some cases, depending on the species we're dealing with. We actually have some species, univoltine Aedes, for example, that require a period of freezing before those eggs are ready to hatch. But nonetheless, when conditions are right, either following heavy summer rains and or tidal events, all of these mosquitoes hatch in what we call broods. So they're all developing at about the same rate. They're all larvae, all about the same size. They all pupate, very close to one another. And then they come off as blood feeding adults within a few days. And most of our floodwater mosquitoes here in New Jersey are avid human biters. So a big nuisance, something that, the control programs would definitely need to be concerned with. And you may have noticed on scanning that list, and then from Barry's talk that started off the summit, that basically there are two genera these floodwater mosquitoes fall into. Now, I'm saying that with the caveat that we're ignoring Ochlaratus as a genera here in New Jersey. So they're largely restricted to your Aedes and your Saurophora species. And if you get a chance to go back and look at that list, you'll actually pull that out. It comes out very nicely. Now in New Jersey, mosquito control is mandated by state law, and it's for three primary reasons. Mosquitoes transmit disease, they cause nuisance, and when those populations go unchecked, they have the ability to negatively impact the economy of the state. Now these laws were passed back in 1912. And at the time, malaria was one of the one of the pathogens that was kind of driving the creation of those laws. But the more recent West Nile virus, dengue, chikungunya, Zika, serve as reminders that there is a public health nuisance perspective to mosquito control, and it certainly warrants these mandates on mosquito control at the county level. So with respect to the organization of mosquito control, each county in New Jersey has a program. Again, they're required to have a program. We also have the State Agricultural Experiment Station, in this case, Rutgers University, that plays an active role. And then we have the state in general. I'm listing here our State Mosquito Control Commission, which consists of representatives from our departments of health, DEP, agriculture, and of course the experiment station. And together, these three entities provide the balanced professional approach for mosquito control, with the counties doing the work, in large part the majority of the work, the agricultural experiment station providing research, reviewing county plans and estimates, making recommendations and providing training. And then the state responsibilities include advising the governor, providing funding, guidance, and support. Now, as touched on earlier, and you'll find this in the presentations that came before me and the ones that follow, rain and tides are the primary factor driving mosquito production here in New Jersey. And monitoring these local patterns helps determine the need for service. And you'll typically find that following these events, 8 to 10 days or so, you'll see an increase in complaints and trap counts by far. So very, very predictable once the weather events or tides have actually happened. Again, floodwater mosquitoes. With respect to the state programs, I'll start off with the first one that our state is involved with, and that has to do with surveillance. We provide funding to the university to provide weekly adult mosquito and vector surveillance reporting. They do this every single week. The data is supplied by the counties. It comes in through our Jersey Serve platform now, and it gets prepared into these weekly reports. It serves as the data for the county programs to help make control decisions. We also provide funding to both the Department of Cape May and the Department of Health labs to provide the actual testing of mosquitoes that the counties collect. Then we have two other programs, insecticide monitoring and West Nile virus genotyping project that we're trying to get off the ground. But the important part there is we have this surveillance data and it's used to make controlled decisions out in the field. The other second state program that I'll talk about this morning is our aerial operations program. The state puts together a contract for both fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft to provide surveillance, observation, and application services upon request by the counties. Now, this program was established in 1949, primarily addresses our Atlantic coast counties. The vast salt marshes. Those counties that participate in the program would make a request to the state for services. Within 24 to 48 hours, we would make arrangements to have a ship out there to meet the need that's being requested. More recently, we've expanded this program to address fresh floodwater mosquito species. And the best example of that is our Essex and our Morris County programs. The main factor limiting the services are, annual funding, as you might expect. Now, an aspect of the program that goes along with this is our state insecticide contract. We put that together mainly to service the state operations, but we make that contract open to all of the counties. And the goal there is to provide quick, easy access to all of those insecticide formulations that you heard Elmer talking about. Goal there is you make the order, and within 48 hours, the material shows up where you need it, so you can use it. A third program we have that falls into, really heavy use for freshwater mosquito controls is this equipment use program. And here we have lease agreements with the counties where the state buys these large pieces of equipment that the county uses, to address a large floodwater problem, for example. We're talking about long-reach amphibious excavators and so forth. In this case, the county maintains the equipment. When it comes into large repairs, the state provides some resources for that. Once that project is done, that equipment becomes available to another county that might be in need, so it can get reassigned. As the equipment ages, and a lot of our equipment falls into that category, currently, we can get rid of it through the auction process, to get rid of surplus equipment. But the program in general is a fantastic opportunity for the state to test new equipment. So when something new, really expensive, comes on the market, state can use its resources to bring that on, assign it to a county, where it then gets tested to see how well that equipment works for mosquito control. So a very good program in that regard. And then the last program I'll talk about has to do with our efforts regarding insecticide resistance. Now what we did is we partnered with all the counties, CDC, the Northeast Vector-Borne Center of Excellence, and the Department of Health. And what we did is we reviewed all the supplies needed to run those CDC bottle bioassays that you just heard in the previous talk. We addressed everything from egg collection to larval rearing to actually running the tests. We brought everybody together over the past 3 years for these annual workshops. And in this case, we provided all the training or hands-on efforts that might be needed. We provided some supplies for the counties to use if they didn't have them. The CDC provided the kits and the technical insecticides that we used for those CDC bottle bioassays. All got together, ran the test, and then shared that data. If counties didn't have mosquitoes available, during the workshop on that specific day, they left with treated bottles to use on their own. We did have a 2020 COVID-19 break, unfortunately, but we do have plans to continue these services. And again, the overreaching goal there is to provide these, to extend the life of these public health pesticides. And I think with that, I'd like to acknowledge all the cooperating agencies in mosquito control in New Jersey, and leave a little bit of time for questions and/or to move on if that's what we need to do.